Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. A big hello to everyone who is joining us from Sydney and enjoying us in this beautiful weather before the rain arrives this weekend. For all those who arrived early and bang on time, double thumbs up to you. My name's Jess Bell, and I'm your moderator for today's session. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm joining you on today, which is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land wherever you are and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. As it says on screen, today's session is all about the onboarding experience and how to deliver a really successful onboarding program that's going to surprise and delight your new hires. I'm super excited to introduce today's panel. So as I said, as Insights Manager here at ELMO, my job is to produce all of the pieces of research that go out to all of our audience of prospects and customers. That includes our Employee Sentiment Index and our yearly HR industry benchmark report, which you may have seen, which came out a few months ago. Today I'll be sharing quite a lot of stats and insights from our most recent Employee Sentiment Index all around the onboarding trends, as well as moderating the session and picking the brains of this fantastic panel that we have on board today. So first up, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves before we delve into the session. Justin, I'll jump over to you first.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Justin Meier. I'm the Senior Organisational Development Manager at ELMO. So started in December last year, and I'm responsible for the talent acquisition function, organisational development in general, and also our workplace experience teams. My first interaction with onboarding processes, and no, don't count the years, people, but was back in 2002. And I've worked across the sphere of HR and organisational development, from talent acquisition through to executive talent management development, capability building, and now I'm landed here at ELMO. So thanks for having me.
Thanks, Justin. Lauren, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everyone. Lauren Trethowan. I'm Head of People Experience and Talent at MYOB. So look after the recruitment team, but also into career progression, succession planning and talent management, and then also our people experience team, which includes all of our people consultants, BPs, and the operational side of HR. Prior to this, I worked in OD, so I was head of OD at MYOB, and I've been at MYOB for 5 years now. Before that, I worked at Australia Post as head of culture, and I've also spent 8 years in management consulting at PwC. Really excited to be part of this conversation though, Jess. Thanks.
Fab, awesome. Thank you so much. Rebecca, finally, let you introduce yourself.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. I'm Rebecca Houghton. I'm the CEO of BoldHR. Essentially, I'm a mentor to middle managers, but what I'm really known for is building B-suite leaders with C-suite impact. Before starting BoldHR in 2018, I also was at Australia Post, so it's nice to hang out with Lauren again after so many years, where I was really in charge of talent acquisition, talent mobility, people change, and people experience. So quite a broad spectrum, but onboarding is really close to my heart because it was a real problem child back then. So I'm very excited to hear what the latest is, the latest thinking and findings around that. So brilliant to see everyone, and good to see some people out there that I haven't seen in a while, Andrew, Thomas, etc. Nice. Say hi. Thanks.
Awesome. So as you can see, we've got a really diverse range of experiences from our panel today, which I think is going to make for a really great session. And if you do have questions for specific speakers as we go through, do give us a shout in the chat. So I'm going to take a quick look at the agenda next. So first off, we're going to talk about why is onboarding so critical, one of the most critical employee experiences that as HR leaders we can design. I'll also share some trends we're seeing from our research around the onboarding experience for employees across Australia and New Zealand. Then we'll talk about identifying your onboarding challenges, getting the fundamentals right, and finally the role of managers, which I know is going to be an important one. And we'll then wrap up with a recap and any questions. So first up, I'm just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So this session is 45 minutes long today. We've got lots of content, but we'll try and keep to time, including some time for Q&A. And the chat function and the Q&A function is open. So please do pop your questions in there. I will pull them in as we're going through the session. And if we have too many, then we'll also try and get back to you after the session offline as well. This session is being recorded, and you will be sent a link to rewatch on demand any parts of the webinar as part of our follow-up email. And you'll also get links to any of the resources that we talk about today, so that the reports and those tools that are referenced today. Excellent. So let's get into it. So as I said, I wanted to start this session talking about why onboarding is such a critical experience for employees. As HR professionals, of course, you have so many competing priorities when it comes to the employee experience. But I'd say onboarding is one of the most important and critical experiences up there. When you think of the cost that goes into both the time and effort of recruiting and finding the right talent, you know, you want to make sure you're holding on to them for as long as possible, and they're really getting a good experience and first impression. Of course, the benefits of a good onboarding program are huge. As it says on screen, employees who rated their onboarding experience as exceptional were 2.6 times as likely to feel extremely satisfied with their place of work. So Rebecca, I'm going to come over to you first. I would like to know your thoughts on what is a good onboarding experience and what does good look like to you?
It's a really great question and quite hard to synthesize in a couple of words, but I think, you know, I like the Gallup version. So for me, there's a couple of different things, right? One is really having very, very clear expectations of what's expected of you, not just in terms of work, but how we work. So work and culture, I'd say, which can be difficult. I think another one is really having a bit of space for this connection piece. You know, we don't necessarily play as much as we want to. And I think the third is that level of just engagement, like make it fun, make you feel like you've made the right decision, and give you, the new starter, an opportunity to shine and show people that they've made the right decision too. So I think really being able to kind of deliver and expand on that original deal that you've made to really make sure the deal's got legs, that kind of feels like the right thing to be imbuing an onboarding experience with. Features are there's millions of features of onboarding, so I won't go there, but I think in terms of impact, that's really where the rubber hits the road, is that sense of we're both getting what we signed up for, we're both able to showcase what we're good for and good at, and the fit the fit feels good. I think if we can achieve those things in the first few months, and we've got that real clarity of expectation going on from both sides, then I think we're in a really good place.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk in more detail about strategies and those features, as you said, later on. But I love that mention of play and employee experience and that fun element. Lauren, if I can come over to you, you know, reflecting on your experience, you know, designing and working in this space and designing and working on onboarding programs, what are some of the biggest challenges you think HR leaders are facing when it comes to designing a program?
Yeah, I think at the kind of macro level, it's really the balance between creating a really personalized experience that can also be streamlined and automated. And, you know, depending on the size of the organization, that automation piece is actually quite important. But you do want the person to feel like their experience is personalized and tailored to what they need and what their personal experience needs to be. I think one of the other challenges is that onboarding really starts from the moment that they've signed their contract. And quite often in organizations, we think about it as day one. And there's this gap between when they sign and when they start, which can be, for some roles, up to 3 months, where they're not necessarily hearing from people in the organization. So I think that having someone own the onboarding experience really helps with overcoming that challenge and actually thinking through how you can create some activity that happens throughout that process. And I think the other pain points come from where you need to interact with teams outside of your traditional people and culture or HR space, such as payroll or on-site or IT. You know, having your laptop on day one is just as important, but often there's silos that are created within organisations, and getting that all to line up can be difficult, I think, and one of those challenges as well. For us, also, we've got a lot of integration and M&A activity, and we find we're also needing to onboard people who aren't necessarily new to an organisation, but they're new to our organisation. And so there's also challenges there around how do you onboard and upskill them and help them build the correct relationships inside of the walls of MYOB as part of that onboarding process as well.
Yeah, that, as you said, that integration of other businesses makes things a lot more complex, and you're really having to think about what is that journey like for them to make sure it's as integrated as possible, which is a great viewpoint, and I'm excited to hear more about. Justin, as you said, you've joined ELMO around 6 months ago, and so you've actually been on the other end of that onboarding process, which gives you such a unique insight. Going through that as an organizational development leader yourself, you know, what did you learn?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting experience, you know, going through a process that you're then going to be an owner or key contributor towards. It's a bit like being a mystery shopper, but without the mystery. So what I did learn was that there was a real genuine passion from everyone that I met in that sort of initial phase, my first couple of days, really wanting to make the experience as positive and welcoming as possible. Having reflected on day one, I attended an induction meeting where it got me more information about, you know, the organisation, our vision, our values, our purpose. And then I got given a structured 2-week program of meetings, events, which was quite full on reflection. And when you think about an onboarding process, you know, it can be a 6-month journey. Having all of that action packed into 2 weeks on reflection was a little bit overwhelming. And I'm not sure how much of that information I really retained and then was able to take forward off the back of that, you know, really intense couple of week period. So while it was done with great intention and trying to get me up to speed and meet all the people that I needed to meet as quickly as possible, it probably could have been spaced out and sequenced a little bit more appropriately, because it was a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, it's that balance, isn't it, of the first week and the information overload, balancing with the cultural elements and the employees' experience. So we'll touch and delve into that a little bit later on, which is going to be really interesting. So we started off talking about the importance and the critical nature of the onboarding program. I wanted to share some stats that we've gathered from our most recent employee sentiment index, and that's a survey of 1,000 employees in Australia and 500 in New Zealand, and we conduct it every quarter. So it enables us to do a good dive into some of the topical issues that are facing employees. So according to our survey of employees, 12% in Australia and 15% in New Zealand say that over the past 3 years, they've left a new job within their first year there. That figure was much higher for our youngest cohorts in the workforce, so our Gen Z employees. It was almost double at 22% in Australia and 29% in New Zealand. Now, what was really interesting about this is a few months ago when we did our HR industry benchmark report survey, we actually found a similar figure when we asked people what's your average new hire turnover. They put it around 13% in Australia and 12% in New Zealand. So it's really interesting to see that from both two very different samples, one was employees and one was HR professionals, that figure was actually very similar. So Lauren, coming to you first, when we're looking at new hire turnovers and the figures on screen, do they surprise you? Do they ring true for what you've experienced? What's your take?
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised that they were this high. I did actually look back at our MYOB data just at least for 2024, and we were sitting quite a bit less than this, which kind of made me feel quite good about it. But I think it really does come down to making sure that you're painting a really accurate reality when they're coming through the recruitment process, and that what they land into matches what they've been told throughout the process. But I also think you shouldn't be afraid of saying that this is the problem we're trying to solve. And actually, we've got a lot of things that aren't working. Come join us and help us solve these problems. And not being afraid of being upfront around the things that aren't working, I think can help make sure that that picture is painted accurately for the person coming in. And I think also owning your EVP is really important through the recruitment process, so that when they join, hopefully, that the deal that you have sold them when they've bought matches what they're getting, and that you're able to reduce the turnover in that way. I know for us at MYOB, for example, we can offer really great flexibility and career progression, and our internal mobility is sitting at 41%. So it is really high compared to market. But equally, our REM strategy is to pay at mid-market. So we know that we can't compete on REM with a Google or an AWS. So we need to be really clear on what differentiates us and what we can sell in that process, and also where we, may fall down against our competitors. But I think that's okay. It's okay to repel people from your organisation as well, if they're not going to be a good fit, because like this data is saying, that's quite costly if you've got 12% turnover, and then you're needing to backfill those roles. It can get quite pricey. I think the thing I'm not as surprised with is the Gen Z stat. I do feel like there's less of a stigma around leaving an organisation within the first 12 months, and I've found that particularly with the younger cohort as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we found from our HR industry research was pre-pandemic, that new hire turnover figure was sitting around 7% in Australia and in New Zealand. So before the pandemic, I think it was 2019 survey, compared to now, which is much higher. Do you think there's also an impact perhaps of during the pandemic that's changed the attitudes around job hopping or moving on if it's not quite right? Do you think that's changed?
Yeah, during the pandemic, I think that there was a lot more. You had the Great Resignation, right? And that was kind of flowing through. It was flowing through into salaries. It was flowing through into people job hopping a lot more. And I think there was less of a concern there as much. And organisations were paying a lot to attract people during that period. So yeah, I think that for us, job security is actually something that we've run with our we've got a startup organisation, Flare, and job security actually came up as being quite high for those people. So it is interesting to see how attitudes have changed as a result of through the pandemic and then out the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's even more telling on as you can see on the screen, is the reasons for leaving. So we asked employees, what sparked that decision to move within that first year sort of probation period. And the top two reasons were centered around the organization. So around 40% said it was because the organization didn't match up with the expectations set during the recruitment process, which is something that everybody has touched on so far. The importance of making sure that promise really follows through into the onboarding experience and the experience within the business. And around 34% said it was because of a poor first impression of the organization. Justin, if I can ask you, what do you think organizations are potentially doing wrong here, and how can we make the first day or that first week really memorable and welcoming for new hires?
Well, I guess as we've touched on, the statistics suggest that there's a substantial disconnect between how recruitment teams are representing the organisation. So there's maybe a lack of authenticity between what the real life lived experience has been. So it's important that your EVP does actually represent what it is like day to day to work in an organisation. One way to counter that is from an employee experience. So the onboarding process fits within the overall employee experience. So making sure that whoever's the owner of the onboarding process does have engagement and alignment with the talent acquisition process all the way through to the start of pre-boarding when a contract is signed through to day one, and then month one up to month 6. So it's really important, maybe having an owner of the overall onboarding process, and then bringing together the different cross-functional teams that are critical in the success of an onboarding process. So as we've mentioned, payroll before, your HR practitioners, technology teams, hiring managers, and also buddies, making sure that there's an assigned buddy to help people set up for success as well. So making sure everyone's clear on what those handover points and touch points are, where possible, automate to reduce the risk of anything breaking down. But while we're automating, making sure there's still that personal touch as well. When it comes to day one, I really loved Rebecca's comment around play. For us, from a principal's perspective, we like to anchor everything around connection on day one. And so that's connection to the organisation, to our vision, our values, and our purpose, connection to their manager and their buddy, and then the wider team that they'll be working with, and also trying to start building some of those relationships with some of the stakeholders that they'll be working more closely with as well to set them up for success. Now, one critical thing from one of my previous organisations, technology was often one of those breakpoints. So not having a laptop available on day one, not having the access or the applications that an individual needed to set them up for success. So that's a really critical one that can cause a major breakage in that process. So making sure that everyone is really closely aligned, through that process, and there's a nice threading from the first point of contact with, with us as an organisation through to start date.
Awesome. Yeah. And we talked yesterday and you mentioned, having that dedicated time with IT already set up in their calendars. I think those sorts of things are so beneficial to show how intentional you've been in thinking about what that journey is going to be like, because no doubt there will be some hiccups with technology. There always are, even with best intentions. So moving on to the second most important impact, which we see through this survey, which was the impact of managers. So that those next two responses were all related to managers. So about 32% blamed a poor impression or relationship with their manager, and 31% blamed unrealistic expectations with their manager. Rebecca, I know this is your sweet spot and your deep knowledge area. So tell me, what are some of the common pitfalls you think managers are seeing with their new recruits, and how they can improve the experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there is no question in my mind the role that a manager plays is one of the most important pieces when it comes to the face value of the new starter. We've created all these amazing fully integrated onboarding experiences, but they're digital consumers. They kind of take that for granted. If their laptop's not ready and their apps aren't open and they don't have a pass to get into the building, really they just take it for granted that that's going to be organized, because that's how Amazon works and that's what we expect. So from an onboarder experience, it really all comes down to that face-to-face moment, that lovely connection with human beings. And I often find that the manager, particularly in larger, more complex organizations, or where a really good support structure has been put in, can find themselves resigning their responsibility a little bit. So sometimes they go, oh, well, HR's got this. They've designed this brilliant onboarding program. I heard this amazing stuff about it. So my job here is done. And they kind of step back. They let recruitment do recruitment's thing. They let HR do HR's thing. They step back a little bit too much. And because of that, they're not really clear on what the whole onboarding experience really looks like. And they're not really clear on their role with it. So they're not complementing and dovetailing. They're kind of running a separate arrangement. So I think that's an immediate disconnect, that immediate sense of friction and people going, oh, something's not quite right here. This doesn't match up. Then I think there's some other things. So one of the things that certainly a lot of my experiences come from all the millions of mistakes that we made onboarding Australia Post. And I put my hand up for a lot of that responsibility. But one of the things that we certainly underestimated was when we prompted a manager to have a conversation about expectations, we didn't go any deeper into how. And I'm going to throw it out as a challenge to everybody. If you're a manager, and even if you're not, take a second to just think about, how might you have a really succinct conversation about your expectations? Like, seriously, how do you codify that? How do you be consistent every time? How do you talk about the job expectations versus the behavior expectations without just citing the values or just citing the position description, which, let's face it, is never enough, and they've read it already. A lot of managers actually haven't done the thinking for that. They don't have the structure to think for that. So that conversation is rubbish. And then it changes every 5 minutes as other things emerge. And they go, oh, well, yeah, I know I said it was this, but now it's that because of this. And I think that adds to the confusion and that sense of isolation for new starters. So certainly one of the areas that I would start really firmly with is working with hiring managers on how to have an expectations conversation. A lot of them are not very good at it. We know that, you know, they're not very good at performance management, and that kind of starts with this conversation.
Yeah, excellent. And we're going to talk and delve more into equipping managers later on in the session. But I think, as I said, that's going to be a really hot topic.
Mm.
So next in the survey, we looked at making it stick. We looked at how long does it take to the employees to decide if the new job was the right move or not. Now, for about 65 of them, they said it's 1 month or less. But for almost a third in Australia and around a quarter in New Zealand, they said they know in just 1 week or less. So it really shows that time period is really critical in terms of making a good first impression. Lauren, in terms of the onboarding process for new recruits at MYOB, how are you ensuring that first month has a really positive impact and, as you said, lives up to the expectations that are set in the recruitment processes?
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that 1 week or 1 month starts from day one. So if you can kind of get even a head start between them signing the contract and doing that and starting that day one, then that kind of gives you an extra month as well to get in there and hopefully create a great impression. I think really looking for those opportunities to surprise and delight. And you don't have to have a big budget to be able to do this. But if you can focus on, you know, I don't know, there's a lot of places that probably use this already, but around finding out the person's favorite snack or their coffee order or whatnot, and having that for them in the first week. Really finding those opportunities where team members can join in even before they've started on their day one, a team lunch or having a team lunch for them when they start, but also other activities that might be happening. I know that I've had members of my team join offsites when they haven't actually necessarily started, but it's been a great opportunity for them to come in and get a flavour for the team and meet some new people during that time as well. Another thing that we do quite early in the process is to do an onboarding session where we have the exec come and join a live session. It's run online, but it is run live. And we're quite big on trying to create that lack of hierarchy in so much as the exec, doesn't matter if you're an exec, the CEO, you're joining the same onboarding experience as someone that's working in the contact center, which we find really, and when they get paired up and you find yourself talking to someone quite senior, really has a great impact for others in the organisation as well. Getting the basics right, the fundamentals, which I think Rebecca touched on around, and Justin as well, around having your laptop on day one. So, you know, on day one, they get their merch pack with their branded t-shirt that's at the right size for them, all of the kind of value stickers and branded whatnots and laptop pass, etc. Is also really important to get right on day one. And I think similar to what Rebecca was saying around it being fun, I think it's really important in the onboarding process to include and have it reflected as much as possible your company tone of voice. So if you are a young, fresh brand, don't be afraid to have some fun with it and be a bit cheeky. We try and bring a little bit of humour into the communication and the process that comes through that, because we can afford to do that with the MYOB brand. But I think being aligned to whatever the company tone of voice is for your company is also really important. And then just going back to the small things that you can do, for example, we start our new starters on a Tuesday because that's the busiest time in the office. And so we find if they're coming in on a Monday, which is actually very quiet for us, it's not as great an experience. So it can just be something that small that actually has quite a big impact to their first day and what they remember about their first day as well.
Yeah, awesome. I love that tip around the brand voice and it not having to be out of the box. It can reflect exactly who you are as a business and to have a bit of fun with that.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So the other important area we asked was around getting up to speed. So on average, it takes around 38 days in Australia and 39 days in New Zealand for new recruits to feel that they are fully productive in their roles, to kind of get up to speed and feel productive. And again, we asked this question in our benchmark report, and the findings were very similar in terms of the length of days. However, for around a third of respondents, they say it takes around 1 week or less. And we also found that the older employees were more likely to say it takes them less time, so they're quicker at getting up to speed compared to the respondents from Gen Z and millennial cohorts. Now, we all know productivity is a really big topic right now. It's something that is dominating the agenda. But as we've touched on already, for new recruits, there has to be that balance of productivity with experience and connectivity, and giving them the time to actually absorb all of that information. And obviously unrealistic expectations, one of those reasons highlighted earlier as to why people would move on within their probation period. So Justin, if I can come to you on the topic of productivity and getting up to speed, how can an onboarding program help that process rather than hinder it?
Yeah, I think as humans, we have a natural bias to action and seeking outcomes and results as quickly as possible, i.e. yesterday. So when bringing someone new on board, you obviously have a specific need for them to be coming in. My recommendation, where possible, is to avoid going for those quick and short-term wins and pile up the work on the individuals immediately. This is when the employers are more likely to feel overwhelmed and question their place within the organisation. So it's important that there's foundations that are set in place. And maybe just ask yourselves, like, what is the appropriate amount of information to share at what point in time? I'll use a couple of analogies. Onboarding is it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. And you have to walk before you can run as well. So, to design an onboarding experience, make sure that you've got the employee at the heart of it, and just trying to balance what is the right information. There's something like 57 processes or activities that people are supposed to undertake as part of an onboarding process. If you deliver all of those on day one and throw them into at an email perspective, you're going to lose people pretty quickly. They're going to feel overwhelmed and maybe disconnect. We know that engagement delivers, outperformed results. So it's really important that you focus on how do you keep them engaged and build those foundations first to then set them also up for success longer term.
Yeah, and if I can give a technology plug here, I know this is a big area where technology can play a really great role in staggering the onboarding activities and the workflow, and can be actually triggered by other events in that workflow to make sure it's not day one, you've got 50 tasks on your plate, but it's actually stepping you through them in a really nicely well-designed, staggered way. Rebecca, if I can ask you on the attitudes you think around managers and productivity, do you think that there is a over prioritization on tasks, and particularly from managers when they're wanting to get employees up to speed as quickly as possible and really have them hit the ground running? How can HR leaders in particular encourage those managers to balance the task and the productivity and the engagement and connection?
Yeah, so I'll start with the managers. So anyone who's a leader here will absolutely resonate with this. The reality is we've got too much work on. We all know that. We've been talking about being at capacity for the last 20 years, and it's actually only been in the last 9 months where we have gone over capacity. So the average manager right now is doing 50% more work than they have hours in the week. Full stop. So when we look at that, and then we look at having, a vacancy for a period of time, and inevitably when we're all, tightening our belts a bit, perhaps we've got several vacancies for a period of time, the pressure to turn the table quickly and get outputs, get widgets out really fast is immense, and it's immense before that person's even started. So to resist that pressure when the cavalry's finally arrived and you're like, oh my God, thank God, right? It takes actually quite a presence of mind. So I think for HR managers to really coach their leaders on holding back for another 30 to 50 days, because they're already, remember, the majority of them will have had a vacancy on for 30 to 50 days. They will have been behind on their productivity. The rest of their team is struggling and stressing. They're not going to hit their targets. The pressure from upstairs is massive and growing all the time. We all know this. Any manager in the room knows this. This is the reality. So for us to be really conscious of that when the cavalry finally arrives, and to hold back and to give them the space to learn and to layer their learning so that they can really take it on and run with it more effectively, that takes quite a presence. It takes quite a lot of strength. And I think if HR could play a role there to coach and support the leader to just hang on for one more month before you kind of let them have it, I think that would have a massive difference in terms of realistic expectations from leaders becoming more realistic for the new starter.
Yeah, great tips. I love that. That holding back and the long-term impacts will outweigh those short-term gains. And as Justin said, we are biased to action as humans, but trying to be patient and wait. Awesome. So we're going to move on. We've shared quite a bit of data there, but I wanted to really make sure we have enough time to talk about practical strategies and tips to help you both diagnose your current onboarding program if you have one, and if you don't, around like building that framework and those strategies to put a good program in place. So let's talk about diagnostics first. That is often the first step in terms of finding out what is working and what isn't working, importantly. And Justin, as you said, you've just gone through this process yourself, which feels like a great thing for people to do if they haven't before or for a few years. Tell me, is there any tips you can give on gathering and implementing feedback from new employees to improve your processes and to find out what's working?
Yeah, so interesting enough, we're actually in the middle of a review of our onboarding processes, so it's a great timing to discuss that. In general, I think it's great practice with any sort of people process that you have a regular review rhythm or cadence, depending on your resourcing availability, maybe whether it's once every 12 months. And during that review, it's important to hear from a variety of different stakeholders and get a mix of qualitative and quantitative feedback. So recent new joiners, people that have been in the organisation for a longer period of time, managers, buddies, everyone that's involved within the overall onboarding process. It's important that to get them together, map your process end to end, so define what day one exists for you. Is it the day the contract is signed, or is it day one, the day that they actually join the organisation and physically show up? So it's important to run through that end-to-end process and then map that out around the different touch points to get an understanding of, what may be working well and what could be improved further. So embedded into our process at the moment, we have some continuous feedback loops that are really important because, if someone has actually resigned, it's too late and you can't actually intervene. So it's important to have that regular and just-in-time feedback as well. So our people partners actually meet informally with our new starters in week 1, month 2 and month 5. This gives them sort of rich information and understanding exactly what's at play, whether that's positive or constructive, but also gives a safe space for the new employee to discuss any challenges and provide any feedback as they go through that process. There are things like, how's the onboarding process been to date? Is it what you expected? Are you feeling aligned to the organisational purpose, vision and values? And get an independent view on both the buddy support and also the manager support through that initial process. We also have a probation performance review cadence embedded as well that aligns to the same cadence. So that's week 1, month 2 and month 5. And that gives an opportunity for our managers and the individuals to sit down and really talk through those performance expectations along that journey within the 6 months, making sure that they're set up for success. They've got clarity around what is expected. And again, there's a slow build around those expectations of capability over time.
And I'm really interested to ask about data and metrics that you think are useful and valuable, both to get a gauge of the program as it is, but then also continually measure and keep track of once you've put improvements in place. So is there any sort of measurements that you like to use to get a baseline, and how frequently do you think we should be measuring?
Yeah, so for us, the main sort of quantitative measurement we utilise is NPS, so that's Net Promoter Score, and that really helps sort of measure the employee satisfaction and whether they'd recommend the process to another employee or peer. And how that is calculated is, it's a 10-point rating scale, and the proportion of promoters, so the 9s and 10s, minus the proportion of the detractors, which is anyone who rated 0 to 6, gives you a good indication of where you're sitting at overall, as an overall picture. But it's important to then dig down deeper into the specifics of your onboarding process to get a feel for, again, what is working well and what can be improved. As we mentioned, we have that continuous feedback loop as part of our onboarding process in our current state, and that allows us, again, to intervene, adapt, shift wherever needed once information becomes available. But then, again, at the end of the onboarding process, we have a survey that will be rolled out to individuals to get more detailed information overall. So I think for, there's two different speeds there. There's kind of a regular review on an annual basis would be recommended, but also ensuring that you've got some continual loops of feedback throughout that process so you can jump in and know how you're tracking over time. Obviously, you've got different measurements such as voluntary and involuntary new hire turnover. They're a little bit of a lag indicators, so you might not know exactly what's happening and miss the ability to intervene. And turnover can be either regrettable or non-regrettable as well. And each of those elements, it's important to dig a bit deeper. So a structured exit interview can always provide you with that level of detail and specificity that you might require to understand where things have gone wrong.
Yeah, and I think that regrettable and non-regrettable point is a really important one, because, as you said, not every hire is going to be the right fit, and it's not so much that the goal is to get to zero on something like new hire turnover, but rather to get to that margin that feels right for the organization. And I think Lauren mentioned it earlier, the importance of both attracting the right hires who are going to fit into the business and enjoy the culture and enjoy that is just as important as, those who maybe it's not quite right, encouraging them to look elsewhere and find what is right for them. So I think your point there on regrettable and non-regrettable and being able to split that out is really valuable. I also want to ask around exit interviews. Do you find those are particularly useful for when they've left within probation period, or just to find out dig a bit deeper into the statistics?
Yeah, 100%, exactly. So, as we mentioned, we've got the touch points with the HR business partners. So nothing should be a surprise by the time it gets to those exit interviews, and that's the whole design around having those regular touch points and that continuous feedback. But people do feel more comfortable in sharing some things with different people across the organisation. But we're hoping that those 3 touch points with the people partner as a starting point then builds that relationship and that sort of environment of trust and safety. So people are happy to articulate exactly the things that are at play once they have resigned or are moving on from the organisation. So things around, did they get the support from their manager? Is it, a lack of culture fit? So then we can go out, okay, well, how did we actually sell this position? Are they not doing the types of things that they thought they would be doing that was based in their position description? There's many different things that you can dig out and get an understanding of exactly what you may need to address moving forward.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm going to move on next to look at framework and establishing a framework. So first of all, what we did ahead of this session is actually had a look at aggregated data from our customer base to actually look at the average length of an onboarding program. We found in Australia, it's around 90 days and 95 in New Zealand. Of course, it's going to vary hugely depending on your industry, depending on the size of your business, depending on the complexity of the roles that are within your business. So I know that in industries where there's a lot of specific knowledge to be learned, that learning phase can take a lot longer. But we wanted to give a bit of a ballpark as we discuss the framework and what a structure and a framework might look like. And as you can see on the right, we're talking here about a really holistic program. So all of those essential pre-boarding activities, but then, going through to the culture, the orientation, the training development to make sure it's a holistic picture and they get that well-rounded experience. So Lauren, if I can touch on your experience, particularly on pre-boarding activities, what are some of those activities that have worked well for you to include in the pre-boarding stage?
Yeah, so I think pre-boarding is all about building the relationships. You don't need to get too much into the detail of the actual role, but finding those opportunities to develop relationships is really important. We use technology, as you mentioned earlier, to help automate that process, and so that there are drops of information that happen in that pre-boarding section of the process as well, which we find work quite well. You know, they get a welcome package. You've got introduction emails. I mentioned that they turn up on day one with the right t-shirt size, so we're asking them those sorts of questions, their favorite snack, etc. Inviting them to various team meetings or sessions or all hands sessions, potentially before they've even started within the organisation, and creating a really customised onboarding plan where possible, particularly where the manager is motivated to do that. We do find that if someone has had a really great onboarding or pre-boarding experience role modeled to them, they're then typically likely to provide a great experience for their team as well. So we do find if we can really educate our people leaders to do a great job, then often the flow on effect there is kind of multiplied. But it is really important as well for us to try, and quite often the relationship between that candidate and the recruiter has developed through the recruitment process, and it's really important to then be able to hand over that relationship to the manager, who they've in 99% of the cases already met through the interview process, but they're tending to go back to the recruiter. So we really do try hard to make sure that the manager can then step in and play that supportive role through the process as well. Yeah, and I do feel like this area is prime for AI to actually help in the future. You know, we do automate a lot of what we do, but I do feel like there's a lot there that you know, in the next 10 years will potentially look quite different, and I'm quite excited by the opportunities there too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those areas that previously has been so admin heavy, particularly for people not using an HRIS or any onboarding technology. It's one of those activities that can really feel very manual and very time consuming and heavy and bogged down, but technology has just transformed the way you can actually build that experience, make it so seamless from the recruitment process all the way through, you know, gathering those documents and making sure there's no drop balls, you know, that it's all working exactly as it should, as you said. I mean, sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, we do have people as well who are interested in getting across the role earlier before they've even started, and are actually hungry for information as well. So I think that's where there's the opportunity for the manager to actually customize and work with the individual to say, oh, if they're asking for information or they want to be sent packs on various things, kind of being able to flex to that as well.
Awesome. I'm going to move along to the next slide. I'm conscious of time, and I really want to delve into managers with you, Rebecca, and talk about the impact, because, as you said, they have a huge role. You know, tell me about what you think in terms of experience working with your clients and some of the big challenges that coming through and those skills gap managers are facing in particular. What are you seeing when you're working on the front line?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I work with hundreds and hundreds of middle managers all over the world. And some of the things that we talk about when we're talking about this, you know, recruitment and onboarding thing, which, you know, as an ex-recruiter, it really hurts me when they say it's the least favorite part of my job, but it universally is the least favorite part of their job. It's quite admin heavy for them. They do have to remember a lot of moving parts. So the more that we can take the remembering of things off their hands, the clearer they can start thinking about the stuff that matters more, which is the content and the expectations. But when we look at leaders, particularly in that middle manager and supervisor space, it really comes down to their maturity. So it doesn't surprise me when we hear older new starters are more comfortable getting in and getting ready within a week. You know, they're used to being thrown in the pool. Whereas younger new starters come from the generation of going to swimming lessons and doing everything gradually and in a staggered way. So most managers aren't thinking about it like that. Most managers aren't conscious that we have these very different speeds in the generations and that we need to have this tailored, targeted onboarding experience. The very best they can do is keep up with minimum expectations. So my experience of working with leaders is they're a little bit shy of being really clear on performance expectations because the goalposts change all the time. I get it. but they could really be a lot clearer up front, and certainly make sure that that clarity permeates the recruitment process more effectively. One of the things where I see the disconnect starting to happen is that recruiters, particularly when you've got a full service recruitment solution in-house, recruiters are taking on almost too much responsibility. Lauren mentioned that, you know, the relationship starts to form with the recruiter instead of the manager. The relationship with the recruiter is irrelevant apart from that transaction. You'll never really need to talk to them again. So your relationship with your manager makes up more than 60% of your satisfaction at work. You know, we make jokes about work wives and work husbands. It's really, really an important relationship. So we really need those leaders to be more involved in the recruitment process, setting those very clear expectations up front, which means they do need to have a think about what are the clear expectations and how do I share the consistent expectations that we've got, and also share the areas where the expectations change all the time. Good, that's reality. So I think really being much better at that, which will help them manage performance better right across the life cycle of that individual anyway. I think managing burnout needs to be another area where they need to be more conscious and have some space to elevate their thinking. So their own burnout is why they don't have the space to think about it. And burnout for managers is higher than anyone else on the planet, any other cohort, by a mile, 2.5 times bigger than anybody else. So for them to be able to restrain their own burnout levels, their own desperation levels to get things done, and to help design an onboarding process that doesn't create burnout from day one. So Justin, your experience, lovely though it was a bit too hectic. You know, and again, that's the throwing you in the deep end version instead of sending you to weekly lessons version of swimming. So we've really got to kind of change that approach to really set the tone and manage that burnout factor. And then I think the last piece is really around making that connection and owning the fact that your relationship with your direct staff member is the most important relationship they've got. So you have to make the time, and making, you know, controlling the pace of work to make that space and create that time. That's a massive challenge for leaders. If they could create space in their diaries, they would. They wouldn't be working till 11 o'clock at night and every weekend, and they all are. So asking them to make space for a new starter doesn't get met with, you know, joy and celebration. Of course not. So we really have to work with them to create the space first, and then to ask them to use that space for the new starter. If we just tell them to make more time for the new starter, we're not really addressing the elephant in the room, which is their workload. So there's a couple of things in there. And Justin, I particularly love your continuous listening loops all the way across the process. I would love to add in there, please have a group of managers of new starters and be listening to them as well, because I think you'll discover those disconnects. You'll discover those moments where they should have read the email about the 15 things that are going to happen to their new starter, but there were 3,000 other emails, so they just didn't. They think they know enough because they did turn up and they did listen to it once, but they've kind of forgotten. So they're doubling up, or they're creating gaps, because the way that they run the experience and their human experience needs to match and dovetail your digital experience. And unless you're constantly checking back with them, the chances are they're going to just drift off in different directions. So we've got to keep them close to kind of keep that learning happening in both directions, because there'll be things that they love about the onboarding that really help them, and things that we think will help them but don't. And anyone who's ever designed a product or an experience, you know, the most important thing we have to do is go and shop in our customers' shoes and realize that it doesn't quite work the way we thought it would work, or it's not working because, and they need more of this and less of that. So I think, please, when we think about onboarding, don't think it is just about the new starter, because we talk about that a lot, put the new starter at the center of the onboarding. Actually, there's two really important actors here, and the manager is the other one.
That's an awesome tip. Yeah, and I love that analogy of the swimming lessons, and that instead of throwing them in the deep end, that continuous process. Sticking with the topic of managers, resources and tools that are available, how can managers I guess equip themselves and maybe take a look at their current skill level and where they need to get to, and I'll give you a chance to talk about the BoldHR assessment that you're currently running.
Oh, thank you. That's great. So look, the work that I do with middle managers really proves to me that there's 3 areas we've got to be good at, right? One is controlling the pace of work, and we've talked about that a lot, and the impact on the manager and their new starter is really obvious. The other one is having some space to think. And I think that's one of the big gaps that managers have, is they're not having enough space to think. So they're not creating that side-by-side, you know, that parallel experience effectively. They're just kind of whizzing through it. The third area is their ability to really make the case. So that's using influence in a really smart, scientific way. And part of that influence is, how do I build a trusting relationship with this person quickly so that we collectively can be better together? So those are the three areas that we always work on across all of my programs. And we certainly use our assessment tools, and we've got a set of them, to help managers to understand not just where are they already strong and don't need to worry, but really help them step back and have a look at some of the patches where they could really do with a bit more focus and a bit more attention. And for me, I don't look at psychometrics as a kind of a values or a styles tool. Our psychometrics are about your maturity as a leader and the impact that you're having. So I would love it if people use this QR code to assess themselves, because not only does it really help us with our research to make sure that we're still at the very cutting edge of what middle managers really need. And when I say middle managers, I also mean ex-middle managers who have maybe left the ranks of middle management, and future middle managers who are very keen to start on that journey. We look at 6 different layers of middle managers. There isn't one great big homogenous mass, and every single layer has a different experience and a different requirement, but every single human has a very unique profile. So for you to get a start on your unique profile, you'll get a report from this, and it will also benchmark you against other middle managers globally. So it will tell you which of the 6 levels you're operating at, why you're operating at that level, and exactly what you need to do to get to the next level up. So it would be wonderful to see some people grabbing this opportunity now. It is a free assessment, so we're not going to be charging you for it. And it certainly contributes to the global research that we're continually doing. So thanks, Jess. Thanks for the plug. Appreciate it.
No problem. Fantastic. Yeah, there's lots of resources, as I said, out there. And it's just a huge area. I think what's really come through and what you've talked about is equipping managers with those tools, not expecting them to have them because they are managers. So I'm going to go along to our quick recap. I'm very conscious of time, and we've had loads of questions come through, which we will get back to you offline, because I'm very conscious of time. So the things that really stood out to me: striking the right balance, the importance of holding back in that first week, in that first month, to allow people to get up to speed in a staggered way, but also that onboarding doesn't stop after the first month. We've talked about the importance of month 3, of month 6, even going out to 18 months, because if that's where you're losing them, then that is a really important area to focus. Justin talked about the importance of measuring, reflecting, improving, iterate, that continuous cycle. The work is never truly done. I think once you embrace that mindset, it makes it a bit easier to say, we're going to continually look at this and reflect and get feedback and improve. And finally, managers, the mindsets matter, the skills that they have really matter, and they need to be equipped with those things to prioritize onboarding, to create the space for their staff and for themselves. So we've gone through a huge amount of content there. So I just want to say a really big thank you to the panelists for joining today. We've covered a huge amount, and we could have gone on for another hour, I'm absolutely positive. To give you a little preview of what's up next, ELMO is running a payroll-focused webinar next week on Tuesday with Chantel Wyman from the Australian Taxation Office. So for anyone in the payroll function, and please do share with your colleagues in that area, you'll get notified of this in the follow-up email that we send out. Finally, I just want to say a really big thank you to all of the panelists who've joined. Your insight and your experience has been invaluable, so thank you. And finally, to everyone who's joined us, thank you as always for tuning in, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jess.